For the last hour of our conference tonight, we shall be enjoying a concert of Elizabethan music and poetry with connections to Shakespeare Vere. The programme, which was especially contrived for us by Amarilli, Elizabeth Pallett and Hannah Grove, was recorded a few days ago in Malvern. I was present at the recording and I can tell you that you're in for a very special treat. After the session, I had a chance to talk to Elizabeth Pallett about the lute, an instrument to which she has devoted all of her professional life. I'm here at the moment with one of the world's most distinguished and brilliant lutenists, and she's in command of something called Lute Web. I think she even set up Lute Web, and so therefore she's almost the centre of the world when it comes to online dealings with lutes. And some of us don't know a lot about lutes, and we're going to talk a little bit about the instrument, about its history, and about the person who's holding it, and that is Elizabeth Pallett. And we're going to see Elizabeth later on this evening with Hannah Grove singing a lot of Shakespeare Vere songs. So welcome, very nice, and thank you for joining in with the De Vere Society Fun.
It's a delight and a privilege. Thank you so much for having me.
Now you're holding what looks like a very beautiful instrument there, and that is the lute.
Yes.
And I want to start just asking you how, I mean, most people don't, when they're children, they don't say, I want to learn the lute. How did you, I presume, transition from guitar to lute? What made you want to learn?
Yes, I did indeed. As a very young age, I guess the age of 7, I picked up a guitar. Luckily, my school had group guitar lessons, so I went from there. At the very early age of 12, I started getting interested in the lute because I had quite an isolated upbringing on a hill, on a farm, and so my one delight was to going to the to the library to pick up a record every week, rent a record every week, and one of these happened to be Julian Bream playing John Dowland on the lute, and realising that I was playing this music on the guitar, and in fact on the wrong instrument, sort of got my curiosity going.
So what did you, I mean, it's a long time ago to ask you how you remembered that incident, but did you actually, even that long ago, think there's a very distinctive sound difference between this, and did you think it really fits the Dowland music better?
Yes, I did, very much so. Even though we all know that Julian Bream is primarily a guitarist who took up the lute, it's the very nature of their instrument, the double stringing of the instrument, the holding of the instrument is very, very different from the guitar. And I guess because at that young age it was a little bit of a leap of faith on my parents' behalf, because suddenly this child said, I want to play the lute, and I'm thinking, goodness me, that's very unusual. So if it hadn't have been for their encouragement at that age, at my age, going out there, finding a lute maker.
Well, yes, I would imagine their first difficulty as a farmer
Absolutely.
in the middle of the sticks,
yes,
doing things, is how do we get hold of a lute?
Yes.
My daughter wants to play the lute.
Yes, so it's thanks to them really that they did persevere with that, and they found a very brilliant lute maker who still makes lutes, living in Norwich, called David Van Edwards, and he happened to have a lute. And so we made the pilgrimage, we bought this lute and found a teacher, and from then on I didn't really look back, and it was a question of finding the right teacher that allowed me to understand the historical context of the lute in order to be able to play it properly, because one of the things I didn't want to do is transfer my skills as a guitarist onto the lute, it's completely different.
Completely different. And so, I mean, it's actually a very rare instrument now. It's odd to think that at the time that we're interested in, the 1580s, 1590s and 1610, it was probably the most popular musical instrument there was, unless you had a fife or something.
Actually, its zenith was in 1590, and we hold all our gratitude actually to very keen players, very keen amateur players who compiled these manuscripts, because professional players wouldn't have done it. You get very, very little material or evidence of John Dowland writing his compositions down. So professionals didn't write their pieces down so much. There are formal examples of that, of course. But generally, on the whole, we have amateur players, really good amateur players, or players that are taking lessons, and then they compile these lessons, they write them out, they compile them, it's bound, and then you have wonderful collections like the Matthew Holmes collection, which spans from 1580 all the way up to perhaps 1610. And he wasn't a lute player himself, but he was very, very interested in the music. He was presenter at Christ Church in Oxford. But this 9 books of lute music represents, a wonderful, significant body of work.
So I'm presuming that lute players were on the whole pretty educated. I mean, if you're saying amateur lute players were writing this down, because the general level of literacy, just writing English, was pretty low in 1590 in England.
Yes.
So presumably the people who played the lute were all educated.
It's a very specific group, actually, I have to say. It tended to be of a noble rank, or you had some sort of affiliation with the court, or you were part of the court, of a leading household. There's often evidence of music making and lute playing in leading households. And it was very much considered part of your education to be able to play music, sing music.
Girls and boys? Or
very much girls and boys, although I have to say, in terms of professional side, during that time it was mainly males who played the lute. But you have books like the Margaret Board book and the Jane Pickering book, which were compiled by young ladies, usually pre-marriage, as part of their education.
And the instruments, I mean, were they brought mainly from Italy, or were they actually made in England at the time?
Well, the instruments were obviously, again, it wasn't a cheap hobby. The instruments originated, there were 2 centres. There was the northern Italy that were renowned for making these instruments, and also in Germany. And we know that there were Italian makers in London. And obviously after that there would have been offshoots, there would have been English makers who would have learnt from these key people. So to source an instrument was difficult. I should imagine you had to have connections to do so. And also the upkeep of the instrument was very difficult.
So what were the strings made of, and how did you get them replaced? It's pretty difficult if they bust.
Well, I think they did snap a lot. Thomas Mace recommended you tighten the first string as tight as you can on the first top string until it's just about to break, and then you tune the rest of it. So you can imagine it was always kind of on
now,
breaking point.
I know that I'm sure that people watching us will be itching to hear a little bit. You mentioned a slightly technical word back then, double stringing.
Yes.
Can you explain what that is and why it's necessary?
Yes. So most people can relate to the guitar, which is single strung, six strings. But this has double courses. It's tuned in G. It has intervals of a fourth, but a third in the middle, and it has these low diapason strings, which are tuned in octaves. So, for example, if I were to just go down the strings, you get this really nice, rich sound. Double courses.
Now, when you say double courses, you mean
2 strings.
2 strings together that you pluck at the same time.
You pluck at the same
that are pitched at exactly the same note.
Absolutely, yes.
So it just gives it a sort of extra richness of sound.
Yes, exactly.
To have 2. But I noticed the very top string is not what you're calling double strung. It's a single string.
This is a single string called the chanterelle, because it's the idea is it brings out the melody. It's bell-like.
So can you give us an example, just a short example, of, say, the melody on the top string, so we get the sense of that tone of it? It's very beautiful, it's very clear. How would you describe the difference between that sound and the sound of say, the top string of a guitar?
One of the big principal differences between a lute player and a guitar player is that a lute player will not use any nails. So they're using the flesh of their fingers to create the notes. So it's a very personal, physical thing to be able to play the lute, because you've got the feel of the string on your finger, which means that you can get this sort of very rounded, beautiful, soft sound out of it. Whereas if you're playing with a guitar, you've got the nail aspect. The technique is very much thumb outside. So the whole idea is it's definitely more percussive.
Yes.
Louder sound.
I wonder if that's what helps the lute be so. Given that it's a plucked instrument, it's very vocal. I mean, of all that type of instrument, it's the one that really sounds as if it's singing in a sense.
Yes.
Particularly when you play melody on it. But.
Yes. Well, I mean, the other thing is that the lute technique very much differs from the guitar, because it stems from the plectrum. If you think of the early medieval lutes and the gittins, they were all played with a plectrum, a quill, or a piece of bone. So you have this up-down idea. This is for this very fast division work that's possible.
Yes. Now, with guitars, we're so used to the idea of sort of strumming.
Yes.
You know, someone goes chung chung chung, and someone sings a boring song on the top of it. But I noticed with a lot of the sort of 1590s songs, the lute is not often strumming, is it? In fact.
No. It's very difficult to pin it down, and this is why we're very grateful for the sources that we have, because it gives us just that idea of what they played and how they played it, because most of it was an oral tradition. So transmission probably would have varied quite a bit. So until you've got it on paper, that's when it starts to get fixed. So John Dowland's first book of Song and Airs, which was published in 1597, is this first fixed idea we have in England of how the lute is played, or the polyphony that's involved in accompanying a song. But there is another side to that as well. There is this improvisatory side where everybody would have known a ground bass, or they would have known a chord sequence, and they would have made their own accompaniment. So, for example, the concert that we're going to perform later on today, we're going to perform a song from Hamlet called Robin to the Greenwood Gone.
Beautiful tune. Beautiful tune. People sometimes in their ignorance think that Greensleeves is the only great tune to come out of the Elizabethan age, but are you able to give us a sense of that?
Yes, I can.
Robin to the Greenwood.
So I can give you an idea of the tune, and then I'm going to give you an idea of a more improvised accompaniment to the tune. So you have to sort of imagine the tune played along. Okay, so you have the main tune, and then the way that this would have been played, everybody would have known a tune, and they would have known the chord sequence underneath. So they would have extemporised a accompaniment to it. So it might have sounded something like this.
Completely beautiful, isn't it?
It is, and I love the way that you can inject this sort of music with your own personality. That's what I like the most about it.
It is quite different, Tudor music, from, well, let's say from music as it developed from the second half of the 17th century, when I think there's a much more standard pattern, not only in harmony but also in melody. And from the late 17th century, I think we all just naturally understand that music. If you're brought up with that, as in fact I was, your first jump into Tudor music can be a little bit alienating. I mean, I know you've been involved in this for so long, it probably means nothing to you to say that there is something slightly alienating, or can be.
Yeah.
And I've come slowly to Tudor, and now I absolutely think it's as beautiful as any music could possibly be. But I'm going to ask you a difficult question, which is to try and see if you can just explain somehow in words what it is about the sort of Tudor music that you're playing, that sort of songs and lutes things, that makes it so special and so beautiful when you get the hang of it.
Well, it's two things really. It's the counterpoint and the way you have melodies interweaving in
yes,
interweaving
which
with each other.
For those who don't realise, that's what counterpoint means. It's the running together of more than one melody simultaneously.
Absolutely, yeah. And so it's just, for me, the sheer genius of writing that gives me a bit of a buzz. Also, I like the fact that some of the compositions, particularly lute compositions, are based upon a tune and then a division. So the division is where you get the tune varied, and it can be in various runs, it can be in all sorts of different forms, but that can be jolly interesting just to see how far this can go. Also the historical context, because I really enjoy looking at the original manuscripts. I enjoy the personal little touches that you find in these manuscripts. Somebody ran out of ink, or somebody wanted to use the bottom to write a note. The Matthew Holmes collection contains prayers, it even contains little legal notes, and it's the human side that somebody was beavering away at this music, just like I am today.
Yes, and it lives.
Trying to get it right, and being moved by that music, and moulding it to your own personality, putting your own touch on it, putting your own bit of ornamentation into it, shaping the melodies. And what I like is there's nobody dictating that. There's nobody saying, well, this is loud, there's a crescendo here, must rallentando here. There's none of those sort of musical directions. So you have to,
so they don't even write things like piano or forte or allegro. No, all that came later, didn't it?
No, not at all. I mean, the most common thing you'll get is it's either a galliard, or it's a pavane, or it's a la volta, and then from that you should know the sort of speed that you should take the piece.
All those pieces you've just mentioned are dances, are they not?
That's correct, yes.
So a volta would be
Yes.
a pretty rapid one.
Yes, that's right, yes. Yes.
Now you mentioned counterpoint, and I wondered if you're able to give us a little example of how perhaps that instrument can play more than one melody, as it were, simultaneously.
So I'll take the same tune, Romid to the Greenwood Gone, again, because it is such a well-known tune, and it existed not just during this time, but well into the 17th century as well. People just used the tune and they would put different text to it. So this is from the Folger Dowland Lute Book, and it's dated around about 1594 to 1610. These dates are a little bit rough because it's hard to tell. But you'll be able to hear the tune, and you'll be able to hear the extra melodies that are put in, and how the tune develops and progresses.
Thank you very much. Well, I think you can see and hear from that exactly why people like Edward de Vere were so in love with this instrument, so in love with music at the time. Shakespeare, of course, said if you don't understand music, then you can't be trusted. And I think that's probably quite a good point. There is something utterly pure and moving and beautiful and truthful that seems to come out of this Elizabethan music. Now, I hope you're going to stick around with us because tonight we're going to hear this wonderful concert played by Elizabeth and Hannah Grove, and they're going to be singing a whole range of songs that connect to Edward de Vere and to Shakespeare, and I can assure you that they are extremely moving and extremely beautiful. So thank you very much for giving us a little run in an intro, and I hope that will also help when you start the concert to know vaguely what you're listening out for and to. Those of you who aren't particularly familiar with the lute will have very whetted appetites, because I certainly am actually entranced by this style of music. It's almost all I want to listen to now. So stay tuned for that later.